So over to you, Tom. There's no need to explain why we're building this church. We've been here for 30 years, but now it's really time to push forward. We have enough proof of God's providence over the past 30 years to address this particular concern and to launch this project with confidence. So over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Farah. So start probably with what you all want to know a bit more about, if this works, is what is it that we're actually going to be building? So as Father said, we've just got planning permission, so we've spent the last year talking about the options we've got. So what is it that we've arrived at in terms of a decision, and what have we got planning for approval for? Sorry, wrong way. So you will have seen some images around the place, on websites, and here I think there's some images over there and over there of what we're going to build. But essentially, this is what we've got planning permission for. So a Romanesque church. It's my helpful pointer, stolen from the field. A Romanesque church, and essentially, for those who don't know, this field out here is where all this is going to go. So the view you will see from where we're sitting now will essentially be the front face of the church here. From the school buildings, so the classrooms and the dormitories, this is the elevation you'll see. Harts Lane side, and then the rear of the church, which will overlook new car parking at the bottom right there. The style has been chosen for a number of different reasons, sort of costing-wise. Obviously, we'd love to have gone with a Gothic, very English-style church, but that has cost implications, which we weren't able to stretch to. Also, we have to kind of be able to demonstrate we're blending in with existing buildings. Although the brick we'll be going with is unlikely to be exactly the same as the buildings we're in and the buildings adjacent to us, red brick was something that we wanted to, or we had to kind of use to incorporate with surrounding buildings. And then we're going with a zinc roof, which actually is relatively traditional material, so a grey sort of low roof. And then some decorative features around the windows and where the roof meets the walls as well. So a mix between sort of functional, cost-effective, but with some beauty thrown into it as well. So that's the outside, and I'll sort of cover. Sorry, going the wrong way. Cover things in a bit more detail later on in terms of appearance. But this is the footprint of our church. So probably helpful if I break that down into exactly what elements we've got here. So the most important of all, our chancel or sanctuary. We've been really lucky with the architect, who I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. That we've spent a huge amount of time. He's not Catholic, he's Anglican, but he was very keen, as were we, that he had a very good understanding of how the chancel needs to be used to maximise the potential of the traditional liturgy. So he watched, we probably sent him 5-6 different videos of Mass, High Mass, some Pontifical Mass, and all the things that we will hopefully be able to see celebrated here. And he it's amazing to see, broke all of those ceremonies down into sort of every single position that servers and celebrant would be throughout the whole of the Mass, in order to ensure that we sort of had a suitable space, and it worked well. So that's it was a really good start quite early on the project. Then we have 2 side altars, modest side altars. I think the intention is to have one dedicated to Our Lady and one to St. Joseph, with sufficient space for a priest and one server. And there'll be votive candles eventually for either altar as well. Sacristies, 2 of those. One, the larger, will be sort of the everyday sacristy, where all the vestments and the priest's vests, and sort of the more decorative storage of sort of more sort of beautiful things that are required for the celebration of Mass. And then a second sacristy, which will be more functional space for storage, where the incense and the charcoal is stored, where the plants for the altar will be prepared. There'll be sinks in both, so those are fully sort of meet all the needs that they possibly could. Confessional, so double confessional for when we are all queuing up to go to confession and there are 2 priests available. We'll be able to get through confessions a lot quicker, and that will have a nice ornate timber door, or 4 doors on there, so that should be a nice feature. Baptistry, so a permanent space for all the baptisms that we have in this parish, and will continue to have. And then a narthex, or cry room, as it's more sort of usually referenced to. This will have glazing at the front, so that when you're in there, you have a really good view still of the sanctuary during Mass. It'll be soundproofed when the doors are closed. And obviously we have sort of speakers in there, so you can still hear sermons and things like that. But yeah, that should be a good space. I think the intention as well is that this sort of shelving and cases are in this space for the sort of repository location things in here. And then the nave, so where we'll all be sitting for Mass. This sort of capacity-wise, we're looking at, depending on what's reasonable. It's interesting, you know, when you're thinking about this, you sort of watch how many people squeeze into pews. I think maximum I've seen is 8 in a pew of 3 meters, so it's quite impressive. Hopefully we won't have to be squeezing into the pews quite as much, but if we did, we could potentially sort of have a capacity of up to 320 people in just the nave, but more comfortably, it's more realistic that we're looking at sort of a 250 people space. Our current one, just sort of references about 150, so we're about 100 more comfortably, but potentially doubling our space if we need to, you know, busy times, confirmations and end of year and things like that. And then finally, the choir loft. So we will have a choir loft that will sit above there. This, if you put seating in it, would sort of cater for about another 30 people, but obviously most of the time it will be used by the choir. So that's inside. If we go outside, this is the church, as I said, sitting out in the field there. This is the existing driveway, as it is at the moment. Hart's Lane outside is along here. This is us, where we're sitting at the moment. Then the dormitory, and then the school, junior school classrooms here. So what have we got out here? We've got new access road, obviously. So you'll come in to the school exactly as you do at the moment, and then you'll turn left just over here to access the new car parking facilities. So we've got, jumped ahead, so we've got 32 new car parking spaces in this location here. Obviously, we still have the parking that we use at the moment for overflow, but for sort of daily use, that's sort of sufficient. And then 2 disabled spaces closer to the entrance to the church. New toilet facilities. I'll go into a bit more about why they are where they are there, but yeah, we'll have new female, male, disabled, and baby changing facilities there. For our lovely English weather, we have a covered walkway that will enable you to access those from the church without getting wet. And that will also serve for sung Mass for going from the sacristy to the back of the church for processions. And then we will have a nice formal garden in the front. And that won't just get forgotten about because it's a planning condition. So it will go in. We had to demonstrate biodiversity net gain for planning purposes. So that basically means any grass we were digging up, any trees we were taking out to develop this, we had to basically reinstate to improve the area. So that's included a lot of native species of fruit trees and things that will go in there, and some other sort of planting that will go around, and hedgerows and things. So it will be a nice landscaped area as well as the buildings themselves. So that's what we've got. That's what we've got at the moment. But how did we end up there? I thought it might be interesting to just go back to the beginning, not too far back, but back a few years, and sort of explain how it is that we got to where we did in terms of design. So this is, the scheme has been looked at, I think, a number of times over the years, but I think the first time it was properly looked at was back in 2016, 2017, when Father Summers was here. And this is one of the options that they were looking at then. So you can see it's very similar sort of style that we've ended up with. And the architect who did this is actually now owned by the architect that we are working with. So there was a lot of sort of stole a lot of the ideas that had already been tabled. The big differences between this was the capacity. So they were, I don't know how far they got in terms of pricing this, but they were looking at a 500 plus capacity church, which would obviously be fantastic, but was well outside the budget. So it's a much bigger sort of building. They were also planning on doing significant more other buildings, so meeting rooms and auditoriums and things that would connect onto the end of this building. And then car parking, it was proposed to put car parking in over at High Grange, which really wouldn't have worked well with the whole idea of this church being somewhat separate from the school and accessible, throughout the day, throughout sort of a weekday, without having to kind of enter the school at all. There was sort of some separation in there. But we did take some of the ideas here, and we went back out to tender for architectural services at the end of 2020. We appointed the architect just before Christmas 2020. And by February, this is what they came back with. So again, very similar to what we've got, red brick. It was a slate roof or a tiled roof at that point. Biggest difference with this and what we've ended up now is the nave. And we had aisles that were in a more traditional English church arrangement with lower aisles either side of the central nave, which the idea being that you get a lot more light through windows on the side of the church into the centre of the nave. So pre-electric lighting, that would have been essential to make sure the church was light and not a very, very dark building. We don't have that problem. And also having multiple roof levels meant that we would have ended up with a more expensive, more complicated church, and therefore, more expensive. So we said to the architect, we love it, but we need to find ways of sort of reducing cost here. So we asked them to lift up those aisles. So we had one pitch roof, which is then what we took forward. The other big difference here is the sanctuaries. So we were trying to save costs, but we also had to make sure that the church was going to work. These sacristies aren't much bigger than the sort of size of sacristies we've got at the moment, which really aren't fit for purpose. So we said, love the joining corridor, that's fantastic, really, really practical, but we need to sort of prioritize the practicalities and the space we need. So we asked them to enlarge those slightly. So then by May last year, they made those adjustments. So you can see now a single pitch roof and a much larger sacristy. They still were trying to push the link corridor, which again, really, really good design and very, very useful. But it was an expense that we just couldn't afford at this time. The other thing that's sort of noticeably different here is the toilets. I mentioned the toilets aren't in this location in the scheme we've gone to planning on. We would love to have had the toilets there, but as you can see, because of its location, the toilets essentially are part of the elevation of the church. So from this view, from this side of the church, that toilet block is part of what you see as part of the church. So therefore, it had to be in keeping with the church. It had to be the same materials, the same roof, which for a toilet block meant it was quite a costly building, even though it's quite small. So we said, if we move that building slightly further away from the church, we can make it much more simple, and it won't be as cheap, as costly. So we got rid of that from that location there. This is the scheme that we went for pre-application submission on. So that's, for those who might not already know, before you submit the full application, you submit basically a tester. You submit a bit of information to the local authority and just say, what do you think our chances of getting planning permission are for? So this is the scheme we did that with. We also did, for those who are really local, you might have got some flyers through your door. We leafleted every house in the village to say, look, we're doing this. If you want to talk about it, come and speak to us. We also went to the parish council and had a meeting with them and presented them our plans. And in all cases, pretty much, it was well received. I think the response from the local authority to the pre-app was, we consider this unlikely to cause harm, which is as close to, go ahead, as you get from them, really. So that was good. And they also sort of gave us some heads up on the types of things they wanted to see from us in terms of surveys in order for them to be able to approve it. So that was a milestone sort of back last year that was good. It was a good bit of progress. So then when we'd got our pre-app response, we'd had some good response locally. We were buoyed by that and excited. Yeah, we want to kind of crack on. We still had money. Money was still hanging over us. So the whole time we were doing these design iterations, we were getting prices checked on everything to see, where does this sit in terms of a budget. At that particular point in the project, it was still over the amount of money that we wanted to spend. So this was our 6th iteration of the church. And as you can see, compared to the other 2 and the previous ones, it's a lot shorter. So we basically said, right, what can we were working at that particular time on a budget of £2 million for the whole thing. We'd had, through the pre-app, we'd had sort of identification from them about ecological things we had to do that were going to cost more money. So we sort of said, right, what is it that we can build for that £2 million? And this is basically what it was. So this was a church that we could afford to spend £2 million on. It would have enabled us to squeeze just about 240 people into it, but it would have been a squeeze. I mean, I think if you measure the distance between the back of the nave and the front of the sanctuary, it's actually shorter than our church at the moment. It's a lot wider, but it would have felt quite sort of constricted. And I think a lot of people would have been thinking, why have we not made the most of the opportunity that we had to build this church? So we knew we could afford this, but we then looked at 2 other options. So the 2 other options, they look very similar, but effectively what we thought we would do is go for what we'd like to build on the basis that we knew we could fall back to this one. So the difference in these 2 is essentially this central one is the same church but just stretched. So the distance of the bays, each one of these measurements is a bay of the church, is essentially enlarged. And the third option is the same, but we've just added an extra bay. And quite sensibly in the end, we went with this one for full planning application on the basis that if we really couldn't afford it, we could just very easily remove one of the bays without impacting any of the other dimensions in the church. So yeah, option 8 was the one we went forward to planning on the basis that if we had to reduce it and go back to this one, that wouldn't affect our planning because we'd be building something smaller than we got permission for, and we knew we could afford this one. So yeah, quite a lot of time spent making sure that we were, budget was being controlled. So yeah, as I said, we went with option 8, was the last one I showed you. This is essentially it. You'd probably seen these images on the website. We submitted planning application in October. We were bracing ourselves, the architect and a lot of the consultants who were working with horror stories of planning applications at schools taking, 18 months. So we sort of fully expected to be sort of sitting on our thumbs for a while we waited to hear back from them. But actually, we were really lucky. I think, all the prayers to St. Joseph and St. Philomena really paid off at this point. And we actually got planning approval in January. Now, actually, we already knew pretty much before Christmas that we were going to get planning permission. We got written response back from the planning officer basically saying he was going to recommend it for approval. So that was a really good way to go into Christmas, knowing that was coming. I think we were really lucky. We got there was a brand new planning officer, so the guy actually deciding on this was brand new to the council, and I think he was quite keen to impress his boss. So he sort of jumped on it very quickly and was very open in discussions with us about what he wanted to see, what he wanted to know. But yeah, essentially this is what we're building. So you can see the car parking at the back, the new access road, the new toilet facilities, the walkway, and the nice trees in front. I don't think there'll be quite as many trees in front there, but yeah, artistic-wise. So that's essentially where we are at the moment. But obviously those are, a few of images, but there's a lot more that goes on behind, and I thought it'd be interesting just to talk to you a little bit more about the architect we're working with, because he's a fascinating chap working within a great organisation. So essentially, as I mentioned before, we took on some designs that have been done in 2017. We could have, the company who did those designs had been bought out by another company, which is Morse Web. We could have just carried on working with them, but we really wanted to make sure we were getting value for money, and we thought none of us, so Father John and myself, and I don't think Father Robert either, had been involved in the project back in 2017. So we thought we'll start to some extent fresh. We'll go back out to tender. So we went to 3 different architectural practices basically started from scratch in that respect. But obviously we offered it to more swept price as well. They were, the three companies were all very good, and we were very impressed with them. Why these guys stood out is that they realised, whilst they had a lot of experience with schoolwork, a lot of experience, a reasonable amount of experience with working on old churches, restoration of churches, they hadn't done a project like this before. They'd never built a new church. So they, I think they have a pre-existing arrangement with a guy called Julian Bicknell, who does have a lot of experience with this type of project. He's written 3 or 4 books about the history of church architecture. Anglican, he is an Anglican. He's not a Catholic, but he immersed himself in everything to do with the traditional liturgy to understand how the church needed to be function, how the church needed to function. So these are some. I think this is a church at it's either Cambridge or Oxford that he previously did. So when we interviewed them, I think we were very, very impressed, and we thought that this is the guy who's going to get this right for us. I think it's fair to say, the other benefit of having this partnership is that where if we left it to him, it would be a £30 million basilica that we'd have up there. And we had his sort of creative flair, and also Morse Webb, who are much more commercially minded, understand budgets, and that we need to keep it in budget. So between the two of them, it's a really good partnership and works really well. These are just some of, seems to have skewed around a bit, the images. But yeah, so these are some of, to give you a flavour of some of the stuff that goes in the background. I mentioned his work in sort of planning out the ceremony. You could probably just see that these are individual sort of priests or servers, and there must be, 500 of these little images planning out various different ceremonies, so he made sure it was all right. And these are sort of some of the images of him giving us ideas of how the roof would look. That we're not going with that, by the way. It's going to be a much more traditional arrangement. But you can see the skill. These are all hand drawn, and these are some of the other options that he presented to us in terms of the way the interior of the church will work. And just fantastic designer.
So you've got the different choices. So the one we've gone with down below. But was discussed columns throughout the church, give you the top left.
Yeah.
Or a concave, an arcade form there.
So this would be right back that first design when we had the aisles down either side. This would be these columns and arches would have separated the aisle, which would have been absolutely fantastic. But yeah,
the
cost
between Father Robert and myself. And I was lucky, I stayed both in France and then in America, using a lot of churches, and some of them freshly built. So we were able to obtain their plans, in particular from Veneta. We got all the plans, all the footprint, and all the plans from the church of Veneta, which was a church which is exceptionally well designed in terms of use. So we were we based the design of the chancel or the sanctuary and the spacing between the altar, the steps, and then the far wall, and this and that, on what we were experienced with in other churches. And one thing about colonnades, they're fantastic, but you lose 10 spaces in your church, and there's a lot of, it blocks a lot of line of sight, because that was an intention.
And sound as well.
And sound, yeah. Everywhere, from any point in the church, you'll be able to see what's going on in the sanctuary. So that was important.
Yeah. Yeah. And then these, again, I think these images are up somewhere, but these are actually watercolours. So again, I think it just sort of emphasises the skill of the guy that we're working with, Julian Bicknell, hand drawn and watercolour finish. So very beautiful. And yeah, this is part of what we submitted for planning. So it gives you an idea of sort of what it would look like inside. Yeah. So cost-wise, I mentioned cost a few times. So I thought it'd be interesting just to sort of break that down a little bit. I can share these slides with anyone who wants to look at this in any more detail. There's some more detailed breakdowns.
They'll go onto the website.
On the website, yeah. But yeah, so as I said, the plans that we submitted for planning we priced that, and it came back. We got priced for everything in £2.73 million. So it is more than we originally had budgeted for, but it is taking the opportunity, making most of the opportunity that we have with this church, and making sure that it does have a future beyond, just a couple of years as sort of things grow, and with sort of larger parish events. So this just gives you an idea of that, how that's broken down. So everything from the blue foundations round to the services is the cost of actually building the church. But just to give you an idea of all the other stuff that we sort of do and the costs in the background. You've got the fees, so that's all of the consultants and the surveys that have come together or are still coming together to build the church and design the church, make sure it doesn't fall down. Risk, so if we are very careful and the very good client doesn't change their mind at all between now and completion, we will save that money. So we do everything we can to make sure that there's a buffer between what it actually will cost to build the church and the risks of things happening. But hopefully we can retain some of that money and not spend it. And obviously that's included within the 2.73. And then obviously inflation. So when we're pricing the work actually doesn't happen, potentially for another year or so afterwards. So there's an allowance for price increases. And there's a lot of, the construction industry at the moment is very busy. So contractors it's in their, they can price things to suit them really at the moment. So that's why we've been sort of quite robust in the amount of inflation with that. And then obviously VAT is obvious. And as I say, for those who are interested, I break that down even further to give you an idea of, what is the superstructure. So, we've got the steel frame, the roof, all the external walls, and then, breaking down to the finishes and what are the fees made up of. So obviously big one being the architectural fee, as you pay to get the quality of design. So this would go up on the website. But just to give you an idea of sort of the number of elements that go into it, that hopefully gives you an indication. So then moving on to the actual construction, a couple more slides on that. So we have chosen to use a procurement route, so the way we were procuring or obtaining the actual contractors that we'll be using, slightly differently than what's considered a traditional approach. So normally you would finish all the design and then you would tender that work to one main contractor who would then appoint subcontractors. Because of the church is a bit different, we wanted to get the input from people who understand how these things are built as early as possible. So we actually appointed a construction manager, the person who will be managing the site out here for a year. We appointed them in December, and they are involved in the detailed design that is still ongoing in the project, and it's really helpful to have their view on the project at this stage. We appointed them in December, and as I said, they're continuing to be involved in the detailed design. So we're talking about now floor tiles, ceiling finishes, decorative elements within the church and out of the church and things like that. So that's sort of still ongoing at the moment. We also have to discharge our planning conditions. So when you get planning permission, you get a number of, I think we have 12 conditions that we have to discharge, some of them before we start work. So we have to still do another 2 or 3 reports on how we're going to manage the ecology that we're disturbing as a result of the project, which is frustrating, but it is just part of the game that you kind of play to get planning permission. So we're working through those, and hopefully by next week we should have all the information we need to discharge those conditions. And then we're hoping to start on site with the groundworks and sort of setting up the site in April or May this year. So not that long at all, which is very exciting. The detailed design. So the great thing about the construction management approach is you can start that construction work while you're still doing elements of design for the internal finishes that will come much later on. And then we anticipate a year's worth of construction. So if all goes to plan, we'll have a working church that we can celebrate the end of the school year in 2023 in. And yeah, so just to sort of reassure everyone, there'll be tight control over segregation of work. The whole site will be fenced off and sort of managed so that school children can't wander in there or fall into any holes in the site. And drop off. The intention is that drop off and pick up as it operates at the moment will continue exactly as it does. So their delivery. Program of deliveries and things will have to work around that rather than the other way around. And we will try, and we've already sort of mentioned or started talking to the contractor about wanting to make the most of the fact that we're doing this, having visits for small groups of school children at appropriate times so we can show them, how the construction works. And yeah, so that should be good. And more information hopefully about that will be forthcoming. And that's it. Any questions?